For the first 9 months, my Cade Nano tank absolutely sucked. The sandbed was pretty much covered in algae and the rocks were more or less bare except for a few small corals. But in the last 6 months, it's really started to flourish, and actually it's become pretty much the lowest maintenance tank I've ever run. So in this video, I'll show you how it's getting on, and I'll tell you just how little maintenance it takes to keep the tank looking great. Now I'm going to start with a few growth comparison shots because my corals have finally started to grow out nicely since my last update. All of these clips were taken 4 months apart, and you might notice that the before and after videos look a little bit different, but that's because I upgraded my camera after I took the before shots. So this is really just to show you the growth rather than the colour, because the colours might look slightly different. And I actually think the growth rate is pretty good going for LPS corals, and it's a lot better than I got in the first 9 months. Now I'm not doing anything magic to achieve these results, and while I do have good lighting, flow and filtration, the tank only really started to take off when it matured. And ultimately I think this tank has benefited from mostly being left alone to do its thing. Although I would say that the Jack-o'-lantern Leptoceras growing under my rock and into the shade is probably due in no small part to the fact that I have full physical coverage of lighting on this tank. I've also mounted the lights high off the water surface to even out the spread, and it helps that the AI blade strip lights also give a really wide spread of light. But another key reason this tank is doing well is because all of my corals are hardy and easy to keep, and I don't have anything fussy like torches or goniopora. Now there's no doubt that torches and gonies look absolutely stunning when they're thriving, but in a low maintenance tank like this, I see my choice as either having simple low maintenance corals that are doing really well, or have high-end high maintenance corals that are sulking. And I always find that even the most run-of-the-mill corals that you see all the time look absolutely awesome when they're properly healthy. That's how the corals look then, so let's see what maintenance I do. In terms of filtration, I just have one filter, a Bubble Maker's filter roller, which means I don't have to clean a skimmer cup, I don't need to harvest Cheeto algae from a refugium, and I don't even use phosphate removing media, so I don't need to replenish dusty GFO all the time. And the roll on my auto filter roller lasts absolutely ages, so the only maintenance I have to do for my filtration is to change the filter roll every 6 months or so. And the filter roll keeps nitrate under control nicely, but it also does a surprisingly good job of controlling phosphate. And my average phosphate level on this tank is just 0.07 parts per million, which along with my average nitrate reading of 7.3 is more or less perfect for an LPS tank. Although I would say that the filter roller is helped out there by the only major regular maintenance job I do, a 25% water change once a fortnight. I use 2 beer fermenting buckets to do the change, so I fill one up with 25 litres of RODI water that I filter myself, add 950 grams of salt mix, then leave it to mix overnight. Then the next day I drain 25 litres of tank water into the second bucket and add the new salt water to the tank with a small TMC return pump. Doing the change itself takes less than 10 minutes, and I can stack the buckets together with all of the equipment inside the top one so they don't take up much space. Now a lot of people will vacuum their sandbed during water changes, but I actually don't tend to do that, and instead I just set my power heads to turn up to 100% for half an hour once a day. Now I'm sure vacuuming the sand is better, but the quick blast of the power head really does kick up quite a decent amount of detritus, which ultimately ends up in my filter roller, and that's good enough for me. In terms of replacing the calcium alkalinity and magnesium that my corals used to grow, I've been dosing Reef's Elements pH Plus for just over a year now. It's a sodium hydroxide based solution, which means it should increase my pH a little. But ultimately, because this is a simple tank, I don't even bother monitoring my pH levels, and in fact I've never even measured them. In terms of maintenance for the dosing, my dosing pump adds 8 ml of bottle 1 and 12 ml of bottle 2 each day, which means I need to top up my 750 ml slimline containers roughly every other month. I buy the dosing liquids pre-mixed in a bottle, but I do have to dilute it 50-50 with RODI water, otherwise it forms a crust on the tip of the dosing line. But in terms of maintaining good water chemistry, that's pretty much all I do, topping up the dosing containers every 60 days and a 2-bucket water change once a fortnight, at which point I also top up my freshwater reservoir with RODI water. Now I do test the water of course, and I test the 6 major parameters on average about once a month. My parameters are generally fairly stable now, but every now and then something will go out of whack and I'll need to test a few times a week while I fix it. For example, at the moment my magnesium has dropped down to 1140 parts per million when it should really be 1350 parts per million. So I've just added a dosing pump to dose magnesium and bring it back up to the correct level. And my phosphate recently spiked to 0.39 parts per million after I got rid of my old filter, only for the new one to be delayed by 2 months. But even when things like that happen and I have to test more regularly, it takes me less than 10 minutes to test salinity, calcium, alkalinity and magnesium, as well as nitrate and phosphate. And while I've had those sorts of parameter spikes a few times on this tank, they tend to level out pretty quickly. And at the moment I'm actually doing a 25% water change every week instead of every fortnight, which will take care of the phosphate over the next month or 2. And I find there's rarely any rush for me to get my parameters back to where they should be, and because this tank is pretty mature now, and because I don't have any sensitive corals, occasional small parameter bumps like that don't ever really cause me any real problems. With all of that being said, I of course haven't had it all plain sailing, and I actually lost both of my clownfish to a parasite a couple of months ago. I think the parasite was something called Brooklynella, which is also known as clownfish disease, and that is why I've since added a UV sterilizer to this tank. Now the tank's had no fish in it at all since the clownfish died, which is to make sure the parasite dies off and doesn't come back, but that stage is almost over now, so I'll be adding more fish in the new year. Now I'm not saying all tanks will be this easy to maintain of course, and with reef tanks you tend to get out what you put in, and it's the boring things like weekly water changes and testing your parameters regularly that lead to a tank that you can be proud of. But now this tank is mature and established, it pretty much takes care of itself, and so maintenance is significantly reduced. Now I'll update you again on the tank when it's got fish back in there and it's looking like a proper reef tank, and in the meantime if you've got any questions let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video give me a thumbs up and subscribe for next time, and until then, happy reefing.